All my life I was cast aside while my golden child sister got everything. On my wedding day, I finally flipped the script, and the revenge I served left her and my parents speechless. My entire life was shadowed by the blatant favoritism shown to my golden child sister. Ultimately, I orchestrated my retribution, particularly after her audacious attempt to grace the aisle at my own wedding. Our parents' preference for my sister was strikingly obvious. If she leveled an accusation against me, they would readily believe her and impose sanctions. Conversely, if I presented irrefutable proof of her wrongdoing, she'd receive more lenient consequences, and they'd still manage to reprimand me as well. My birthday cakes invariably featured her preferred flavor, a choice our parents feigned ignorance of my genuine dislike for. She consistently received more gifts than I did, and our family outings were always dictated by her desires, even when the occasion was ostensibly about me. My sister matured into a deeply spoiled individual, frequently treating me as an emotional target. Initially, her interactions with me were minimal, but her conduct worsened significantly during our teenage years. She eventually found herself without companions, and her disposition deteriorated. Whether her friends relocated or simply abandoned her due to her unkind nature remains unknown to me, as we were never close. Our parents would laud her accomplishments, yet they never acknowledged any difficulties she faced. In stark contrast, they relentlessly spotlighted my deficiencies, often turning them into jests. My awareness of her lack of friends stemmed from attending the same school. I simply observed her increasing solitude while I, paradoxically, enjoyed a fair degree of popularity. Upon realizing my social standing, my sister's sporadic bullying escalated into a relentless campaign to undermine me. She began fabricating more accusations against me and my friends. Consequently, my parents prohibited my socializing with anyone, citing flimsy pretexts like, "Your sister says they're not good people," or, "Why do you seek to depart from us? Why can't you emulate your sister and relish family time?" My salvation from utter solitude came through my extended family. Most resided in our hometown, and despite some age disparities, I maintained strong bonds with my cousins. During one family assembly, they extended an invitation to an event I no longer recall. I responded wistfully that I was forbidden from leaving the house. When questioned why, my younger self candidly declared it was because I wasn't permitted to have friends, as my sister had none. This remark reached the older relatives, who apparently chastised my parents severely afterward. I was subsequently scolded for fabricating a story and grounded for a month, but following that, they granted me some latitude, making the initial reprimand worthwhile. My sister eventually transferred schools. I presume the humiliation of our extended family learning of her social ostracization became unbearable, prompting her demand for a switch, which our parents immediately acceded to, despite the additional expense due to the new school's distance. She did manage to forge new friendships there. However, she never reverted to largely ignoring me, having experienced the power of tormenting me and harboring anger over my disclosure of her friendless state to the family. She never relinquished her grip. My existence remained challenging. Her new companions would visit and harass me, which my parents dismissed as light teasing. I never invited my own friends home because my parents were abysmal hosts, or my sister would falsely accuse them of theft, and my parents would unquestioningly believe her. Nonetheless, my bond with my cousins deepened, as my parents never dared to treat family members in such a manner. Then I met my first boyfriend. I hesitated to introduce him at home, but my parents insisted. During one visit, we became separated, and he sought me out to disclose my sister's flirtatious overtures. She had approached him in revealing attire, batting her eyelashes, and proceeded to disparage me while exalting herself. He found it off-putting and promptly left to find me. Naturally, my sister presented a different narrative to our parents, alleging that my boyfriend had attempted to flirt with her, which she, of course, had virtuously rebuffed, unwilling to betray me. Guess whom our parents believed? My boyfriend wasn't flawless, but I immediately credited his account, largely for a rather unkind personal reason. Recall, I was a teenager enduring unjust treatment, deeply resentful and morose, and I despised my sister as intensely as she detested me. With that disclosure made, let's discuss appearances. I hadn't mentioned them earlier as they weren't pertinent. Our parents were overweight, and their expression of affection often involved food, more servings, numerous treats, and so forth. My sister also carried excess weight, whereas I remained slender, largely because my punishments frequently included the deprivation of treats or snacks. While physical appearance is secondary to character, my sister, even then, was already rude and self-absorbed. Her attempts at flirtation were clumsy, as she had never learned the necessity of effort, accustomed as she was to demanding and having our parents comply. Adding to this, the fact that she didn't resemble a glamorous model meant that even my insecure teenage self found it implausible that my boyfriend would attempt infidelity with her. My parents subsequently forbade me from continuing a relationship with such a terrible boy. I tried to maintain it in secrecy, but it proved difficult, and the relationship dissolved. I later acquired another boyfriend, but once more, my sister accused him of flirting with her when he rejected her advances. And again, my parents believed her. I attempted to highlight the recurring pattern, but they concluded that I was incapable of making sound choices and consistently selected unsuitable partners. The relationship couldn't withstand the Romeo and Juliet dynamic and likewise faded away. I would eventually acquire a reputation as promiscuous in high school, comfortable with casual physical intimacy, but avoiding serious relationships. Fortunately, this never reached my sister or parents. My sister, during this period, did bring one boyfriend home. He was paraded with immense pride, and our parents spent every moment extolling his virtues and questioning why I couldn't emulate my sister by finding someone similar. This continued until he abruptly ceased appearing, and suddenly, he was rebranded as a conniving scoundrel who had deceived my sister. The inequitable treatment persisted. She enjoyed greater spending money and significantly more lenient curfews than I did. She was free to go wherever, whenever, while I remained restricted. If I raised this discrepancy, my parents would attribute it to her being older. Yet, upon reaching that age myself, I still wasn't afforded the same liberties she had enjoyed. When I pointed this out, they denied ever making such statements or asserted that it was because I couldn't be trusted, using my sister's accusations against my boyfriends and friends as proof of my poor judgment. Time progressed, and it was my sister's turn to graduate. She gained admission to a college that wasn't particularly prestigious, and she secured no scholarships. Again, as only her achievements were conveyed to me, I remain unaware of which institutions she applied to, so I cannot gauge the extent of her rejections. I do know her academic performance in school was lackluster, however, because a B grade would trigger family celebrations. My grades were generally strong, but my parents consistently refused to acknowledge them, claiming, "Since you always get those, what is there to celebrate?" My parents, naturally, orchestrated a grand celebration for my sister, declaring they would cover all her expenses. I felt a wave of relief at the prospect of her departure, though it didn't truly simplify my life. She would return home every other weekend, and invariably, items would go missing from my room, or some new issue would arise, designed to make my existence wretched. My curfews remained stringent. Eventually, my mother approached me about my upcoming graduation. I am only a year younger than my sister. She informed me that, due to their financial commitment to my sister's college education, they lacked the funds to support mine. Therefore, it would be better for me to secure employment immediately after graduation and await my sister's completion of university to ascertain if they could afford something for me. Oh, and if I chose to remain at home, I would be expected to cover all my personal expenses, a portion of the utility bills, and rent. I mentioned the possibility of student loans. My mother affirmed this, then immediately contradicted herself, claiming that because they were so caring towards me and I possessed such poor judgment, they would be the ones to determine if a college justified my incurring debt. I'm uncertain how they intended to obstruct my access to loans, but I didn't inquire. Scholarships were not mentioned. They no longer tracked my academic performance and never genuinely believed in my capabilities anyway. I didn't bat an eyelid. I simply uttered, "Okay." My mother clearly didn't anticipate this reaction and continued to weep. Perhaps she hoped I would throw a tantrum, providing them an excuse to never fund my college. But I remained composed, merely stating that I understood their position, thanking them for their concern, and that was the extent of it. My father later attempted a similar conversation, but I likewise refused to become emotional. You see, after a lifetime of their deplorable parenting, I harbored no expectations regarding my education. I knew they would concoct an excuse to avoid paying for mine and to make my life miserable. I never genuinely believed they would eventually contribute if I worked and patiently waited for my sister to graduate. I had been diligently preparing for college for a considerable period. With my limited social outings and few friendships, I possessed ample time for diligent study, which I pursued rigorously, viewing higher education as my sole path to liberation. The moment arrived, and I toiled relentlessly, securing a scholarship. Not to an Ivy League institution, nor for a demanding field like law or medicine, but it was for a respectable course at a reputable college, fully funded. Knowing my sister would detest this outcome and attempt to sabotage it via our parents, I publicized my achievement on social media while simultaneously informing them. I even forced myself to express gratitude in the post. Now, they couldn't forbid my attendance, as they would have to offer an explanation to the extended family. Initially, they even displayed a modicum of pride, boasting about it. Then, I presume my sister intervened, causing them to shift their stance, even asking if I was sure I wanted to proceed. They let slip that my sister was struggling academically in college and implied that since she was smarter and possessed better judgment than I did, my own struggles would be far worse. I obviously stood my ground. They were displeased but powerless to intervene. College proved to be my salvation. I began to experience genuine happiness. I maintained contact with my parents, visiting on holidays and similar occasions, but their refusal to provide any financial assistance afforded me a valid reason to frequently decline visits due to monetary constraints. During this period, I carefully avoided introducing any romantic partners to them. My sister, meanwhile, ceased her college attendance. I know she never graduated because, again, they would have made a grand spectacle of it. She relocated back home, incurring no bills or rent, but it's different, my parents declared, and commenced working at the same company as my mother, undoubtedly due to my mother's influence. All of this was presented to me as a source of immense pride. We're almost there, I promise. I encountered my husband around this time. You know those individuals who claim, if I were in that situation, I would have acted differently? My husband is precisely the type who actually follows through. I, on the other hand, am the meek, acquiescent type, frequently finding myself a doormat in any given situation, only to lie awake at night, regretting my inaction, wishing I had formulated some clever retort. I am the sort who cannot help but cry when angered. My husband is the individual who delivers an immediate comeback. He thrives on drama and relishes its resolution. He is the kind of person who, if he doesn't instantly respond to an insult, you'd be wise to start worrying, because he won't simply forgive and forget. He'll be meticulously planning something far worse in retaliation. He was the one who encouraged me to post this story here and even desired to submit it to a nuclear revenge forum, but ultimately concluded that our actions didn't quite qualify as nuclear. People were baffled by our pairing, but just because my upbringing rendered me incapable of acting like him didn't mean I didn't appreciate it. I adore that my husband accomplishes what I cannot, and he treats others with respect, provided they reciprocate. When we discussed matrimony, we mutually agreed that the ceremony itself held little significance for us, primarily due to our budget. We preferred to allocate our resources to a dream honeymoon journey through Europe. Regarding the location, since his relatives were dispersed and mine predominantly resided in my hometown, we opted for a local ceremony. We weren't living excessively far away either, allowing for extended weekend trips to manage arrangements. Plus, some professional flexibility meant we could prolong our stay in my hometown if necessary. We dispatched the engagement announcement and saved the date cards for a wedding several months later. At this juncture, my parents naturally demanded an introduction to my fiancé. I wished to cultivate courage and decline, but found it difficult. The geographical distance had led me to contemplate that perhaps my parents weren't so terrible after all. Well, my husband looked as if I had canceled Christmas when I told him I would acquiesce, though I vowed to ensure they were never left alone with him. You see, he had been meticulously preparing for this moment. He even purchased a high-quality recorder, small enough to conceal in a pocket, to document everything. He was elated, envisioning all the ways he could rebuff my sister's advances, insult her, and then disseminate the recording of her attempts to my family. So, he departed alone, excited to meet them, and returned later, euphoric. Babe, you won't believe the awful things they desired. Babe, we can utterly screw them over. There are so many possibilities. I was bewildered and eager to hear the recording, but he shrewdly advised me it would be more beneficial to hear his account first, lest I misunderstand. He recounted his experience. Upon arrival, instead of any flirtation, my parents and sister seated him. Following some grumbling about their disapproval of him, my judgment, and so forth, they proclaimed their willingness to fund my wedding, contingent on one condition: my sister would walk down the aisle. My parents insisted that my sister would proceed down the aisle at my wedding first, clad in a wedding dress. Their rationalization was that it was unacceptable for a younger sister to marry before an elder, so it was only fair if my sister at least experienced the moment at my chosen venue, with photographs taken in the gown, and even enjoyed a cake later. Hey, vengeful husband here. Hell hath no fury like a pro-revenge, instant karma, nuclear revenge lurker when his beloved is scorned. That said, as much as my wife, she's my wife now, portrays me as this quick-witted individual, I admit my neurons all but short-circuited when those people genuinely propose such nonsense, presenting it as some grand beneficence. A gift even Troy would rather re-accept, horse and all. Alas, after my brain rebooted, I did have a full inventory of insults poised to erupt, but something in my very soul whispered, like a fiend, string these imbeciles along. So I declared I needed time to consider, to gauge my wife's, then fiancé's, reaction, and then I bolted from there before I could betray my nefarious intentions. Back to me, the wife. My husband then sincerely recounted how my parents wished for even my wedding to revolve around my sister, a wide grin spreading across his face, and the recording serving as irrefutable proof. I was stunned. The distance had softened the harsh reality of their previous treatment, and I genuinely believed even they wouldn't stoop to such depths. Thankfully, my husband's insistence on the angle of revenge prevented me from spiraling into a negative emotional state. We delighted in devising numerous schemes to exact our revenge, ranging from the ridiculously outlandish to what we deemed feasible. We then contacted his much more pragmatic brother once we had settled on a particular plan. It initially involved having two distinct venue addresses, providing them with the incorrect one, and so forth. Well, the level-headed brother chastised us for it. While he conceded that he could never persuade us to abandon retaliation, he at least demonstrated that such an elaborate ruse would be difficult to execute. Some of our other concepts also carried the risk of legal repercussions, so we eventually settled for the most innocuous plan, feign agreement, but then hire security and bar her entry. Obviously, if that were the entirety of it, it wouldn't qualify as pro-revenge. The remainder of the plan was largely my husband's doing, but he insists I recount it. So here goes, but it's crucial to state that every action he took was previously discussed with me, and they were our mutual ideas. He returned to my parents, stating he had probed and thought I wouldn't be down with it. However, he claimed he personally saw no issue and, desiring to prevent the family from fracturing, would be willing to assist them in its execution. He pointed out that I dislike conflict, so if I were confronted with it unexpectedly, I might not throw a tantrum in front of all the guests. On the other hand, marriage is a momentous occasion, so who could predict if I would lash out? Thus, he proposed a compromise. They would help defray the costs. This way, I would feel even greater pressure to remain silent, not only because our families would be present, but also out of gratitude for their financial assistance. He described my parents' shocked expressions, and my adult sister literally began skipping with joy like a small child. The plan was accepted. Importantly, my husband also asserted that, due to my bad judgment and past boyfriends, these words were all my idea, and I'm immensely proud of using their own language against them. I was distrustful and controlling, and frequently checked his phone and personal belongings to ensure his fidelity. As such, it was imperative that no detail of this plan concerning my sister walking down the aisle before me ever be committed to writing. All discussions would occur at their residence. And so began months of elaborate deception, during which my parents and sister believed they were manipulating me, while my husband and I were, in essence, extracting funds from them rather than having them merely cover the wedding expenses. My parents, of course, wanted input on every aspect, including details that held significant personal meaning for me, such as the musical selections and color scheme. My husband would skillfully persuade them to relinquish these decisions to keep me in line, but since we never genuinely cared much for the ceremony itself to begin with, everything else was fair game, or so they thought. Here's our strategy. We would visit the venue to review the beverage and menu options, and then accept the lowest or second lowest price choice. My husband would then discreetly take my sister there to sample it, and then sigh, lamenting, "It's a pity we don't wish to exploit my parents' generosity, so we won't opt for the finest selections." This invariably prompted my sister to demand that my parents pay for the best. My parents would then assure me not to worry, declaring they would cover the most expensive option. The same approach was employed with the photographer and floral arrangements. My husband presented my sister with a bouquet of the flowers we desired, then sorrowfully expressed how I supposedly preferred some other tasteless flowers. This led to my parents instructing me that they wished us to proceed with said flowers, and they would bear the cost. When it came to the wedding dress, we encountered a minor hurdle. My parents desired me to wear a hideous dress. All right, it wasn't overtly hideous, but it utterly clashed with my style and would not have flattered me. Our initial plan was to agree and then simply not wear it, but my mother sent me a message about it, thereby creating written evidence. We had to pivot, with me refusing to engage via text and standing my ground. My husband then visited them, promising to see what he could do. My sister suggested ruining my preferred dress, so I would be forced to wear the alternative. He feigned agreement. Throughout this entire period, they meticulously kept all communications outside of any text messages. We ensured this by having me respond to my sister whenever she attempted to message my husband, which reinforced the uncontrolling and neurotic claims my husband was making, so they readily believed it and never risked putting anything in writing. Some individuals might object to the idea of their partner disparaging them to family, but I am such a doormat that the thought of being portrayed as this controlling and dangerous individual was incredibly amusing to me, and I actively encouraged him. I suppose I possess a warped sense of humor. Oh, and my sister did attempt to flirt with him, but he acted conflicted to truly sell his allegiance to them. My husband would pretend to share information with them without my knowledge, but he never disclosed that we had hired security. It was truly comical. My husband and I, who had genuinely considered a simple courthouse wedding to allocate funds towards our honeymoon, ended up hosting this extravagant, costly wedding and barely spent a dime ourselves. We considered it reparations for emotional damages from my parents. I think my husband, okay, he just confirmed I'm right, was enjoying the entire deception more than the actual planning of our wedding. I didn't believe it was possible to witness a man beaming at the prospect of dedicating his entire Saturday to a car journey solely to discuss wedding details with his in-laws, but here we are. Soon, the momentous day arrived. The scheme devised by my parents, sister, and husband involved waiting until all guests were seated. Since the bride traditionally makes a late entrance, they intended for my sister to arrive at that precise moment, avoiding any chance of me seeing her and intervening. She would then proceed down the aisle. By the time I learned what had transpired, it would be too late to do anything. As for my dress, we had saved some of the leftover fabric from my alterations. My husband took that to my parents' house. My sister still resides with them, and presented it as proof that he had ruined my dress. He then claimed he had to return to me, as I was raging and he needed to calm me down. He told them he would meet them at the wedding. We ensured our real security remained concealed initially. As guests and my parents arrived, they only observed a woman with a list of names for verification. Only after my parents were comfortably seated did we introduce the actual security, a man who looked like a bodyguard. We specifically instructed him not to permit my sister entry and promised a generous tip if he maintained the confidentiality of our instructions. Soon, the moment arrived. My parents received a text message indicating that my sister was less than 5 minutes away, prompting my father to signal for the ceremony to commence. My bridesmaids had been pre-instructed to follow his lead, which they did without consulting me. After they had all taken their places, my father positioned himself at the entrance, awaiting my arrival. During this, a friend, not part of the wedding party, texted me to prepare, specifically to avoid suspicion if my husband or bridesmaids started texting. This friend, an ally of my husband, was as eager to stir drama as he was and did not mind not being a bridesmaid. As soon as my father took his position, the bridal song began. The doors opened, and I entered. My father was visibly shocked to see me. He attempted to peer behind me but couldn't view the venue entrance from our vantage point, so he had no idea what had become of my sister. Then his phone rang. I saw the caller ID, it was her. He abandoned me with a mumbled, "Something came up." Gasps and confusion filled the room. The friend who was in on the plan loudly inquired, "What happened?" I lied, stating tearfully he told me it wasn't supposed to be me there. My husband and I had agreed that if my father abandoned me, I should utter those words to make him appear as reprehensible as possible. The tears were not solely an act. I was genuinely hurt and struggling to suppress my emotions. The friend then loudly asked, "What did he mean by, 'It shouldn't be you'?" ensuring everyone within earshot would hear and subsequently disseminate the remark. Then she declared, "I will go and check," and promptly ran off. We had meticulously planned this so she could instigate chaos with the security and prevent my father from returning to disrupt the ceremony. Eventually, my mother also departed. At this point, my husband's father swiftly rushed over and took my arm. He had been forewarned he might be needed. His desperate dash towards me brought a smile to my face. I walked down the aisle to a chorus of whispers as people discussed the unfolding events. Some guests also left to investigate. When I reached my husband, all was well. He comforted me, jesting that my sorrowful expression was so convincing I deserved an Oscar, and reassured me he would address my parents' actions. We were married without any further complications. My parents did not return. I noticed many people leaving and returning during the reception, but no one dared to inform me of what was happening. Someone whispered into my husband's ear, and he stepped outside. He returned later with a thunderous expression, but murmured to me that he needed to go hide before he broke character and started smiling. It worked. Here's the summary I gathered afterwards from friends, family, the security guard, and my husband. My sister arrived in a wedding dress. The security personnel refused her entry, precisely as we had instructed. He informed her she must be at the incorrect venue because there was already a bride. Yes, we tipped him very well as promised. My father attempted to threaten him with law enforcement, claiming he had never heard of him and thus he couldn't possibly be employed there. The security guard readily agreed to contact the police, asserting he was hired by us and merely executing his duties. My father realized it would be too late and then tried to demand that he let my sister in. At this juncture, our friend arrived, began shouting, insulting my sister, and demanding an explanation, essentially stalling. My mother soon arrived, followed by other guests. By then, the wedding plan was utterly ruined. All my parents could do was attempt damage control, as everyone who learned about their scheme was horrified that they had tried to pull it off. People began screaming and berating them. The trio, naturally, claimed it wasn't a secret and blamed my husband. When he was summoned, my husband donned his most confused expression and denied everything. To quote him, "Gaslight, gatekeeper, girl boss, LOL. He denied ever agreeing to such a preposterous plan. When they insisted he had, he demanded proof, and of course, they could provide none. All the text exchanges they could display concerned normal wedding decisions. My sister was screaming, crying, and apparently sat on the floor, kicking her legs like a child. My father looked as if he wanted to physically assault my husband, but security and other people restrained him. Naturally, they claimed they had no proof because my husband had explicitly told them not to text. My husband laughed and remarked, "Wow, how convenient, huh?" Then he reiterated, "Why would I ever agree to something so messed up?" He proceeded to lambast them for being terrible parents and declared he wouldn't permit their foolish schemes and falsehoods to ruin his wedding, then returned to me. No one believed them. The venue had cameras, but they wouldn't show me the recording as it was strictly for security purposes. However, some guests filmed portions of it. Witnessing my parents and sister being verbally torn apart by everyone who emerged to observe the drama was utterly delightful. After years of being falsely accused and disbelieved, seeing them experience a taste of their own medicine was one of the finest wedding gifts. My mother was weeping, my father's complexion fluctuated between purple and white, and my sister remained on the floor, crying and screaming. They relentlessly insisted that my husband was complicit, but people kept pressing, "Why would he agree? Why is there no proof? And why did you want my sister to do this at my wedding?" They had no satisfactory answers. Eventually, they were instructed to depart and had no alternative but to comply. My father apparently had to physically drag my sister up as she refused to leave the ground. Again, no one spoke of it to me all evening. I suppose they wished to spare me, and perhaps it's because I was the bride and not just a guest for once, but it truly felt as though everyone was making an extra effort to be kind, positive, and enthusiastic about everything. My husband claims the lavish food and drinks they were consuming certainly helped, LOL. We had a blast. My husband maintained his feigned angry expression for only a brief duration before breaking into smiles again. Afterward, we retired to the hotel for some rest before embarking on our honeymoon. Speaking of which, my parents did attempt to pay for our plane tickets, but we deemed that risky, as they might try to cancel them or some other malicious act, so we declined. Since then, the three of them have attempted to contact me. I've refused calls because my husband insisted on maintaining a paper trail, a shrewd move, because my sister eventually messaged me. I won't repeat her exact words, as they were quite unhinged and made little sense, but the crucial part was that she blamed me for her humiliation, called my husband a two-faced snake who had deceived them for months. He wants to print and hang that on our wall. LOL, and expressed hope and certainty that I would be cheated on by him. She even insinuated he was cheating on me with her. My husband took my phone, screenshotted the call logs, my sister's messages, and some messages from my parents demanding I answer the phone, and sent it all to our family group chat. He also sent screenshots of messages they had sent to him, where they called him names and issued threats, but he maintained his delusional, "I never agreed to anything" stance and even threatened to sue them for defamation and harassment. He then drafted a message in the group chat, pleading with my family for assistance, stating I was now being constantly harassed by them. He implored them to prevent my parents and sister from ruining our honeymoon, following their failure to ruin our wedding. He concluded with a request that they not share our locations to prevent my parents from dispatching my sister to our honeymoon suite, where she might claim he had somehow agreed to pretend to sleep with her, LOL. My family assured him they would handle it, and since then, we have enjoyed peace. My husband is slightly disappointed that my sister didn't disobey, preventing him from further rebuking her. We shall see if this peace endures. All in all, while I would have preferred a normal, loving family at my wedding, at least for once in my life, they not only failed to spoil something profoundly meaningful to me, but I also secured my revenge. Extra information: do I know why they treated me this way? I've been asked this question frequently, so I assume you all will wonder the same. I have pondered this my entire life and still lack a definitive answer. I attempted to inquire when I was young, but they denied any preferential treatment and scolded me for being spoiled, so I ceased trying. I've considered numerous possibilities, but based on my observations, I suspect this. I was an unplanned child. They had taken a considerable time to conceive my sister, making her not only deeply desired, but also perceived as a miracle child after such a long wait. However, given our small age difference, I believe they did not anticipate having another child so quickly or easily and failed to use adequate protection after my sister's birth. Perhaps they didn't realize my mother was pregnant until it was too late, leaving them burdened with an unplanned baby while still managing a newborn. They weren't financially affluent, so the additional expense likely exacerbated their resentment towards me. But that is merely my speculation. Regardless, I've accepted that the specific reason won't truly matter. Their actions towards me were unwarranted, irrespective of the underlying cause. Did they genuinely believe this would succeed? My husband and I have a theory that they never intended to fully execute this at all. We think my sister threw a colossal tantrum over me marrying first, when she rarely even secured dates. Consequently, my parents presented my husband with that outlandish proposition. They had no desire to pay for my wedding and didn't believe we would accept, nor did they think it would reflect favorably on them to do so. By making the suggestion and anticipating a refusal, they could present themselves as benevolent figures to my sister while simultaneously possessing an excuse to withhold any financial contribution from me. However, my husband accepted, leaving them unable to backtrack without risking my sister turning against them. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.